It's the 40th anniversary of arguably Arnold Schwarzenegger's greatest performance. And we will probably argue that. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Conan the Barbarian. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is someone who can answer the riddle of steel. Please welcome Chad Smith.
Yes, you know what it is, don't you, boy? I shall tell you, it's the least I can do. Steel, well, it really isn't a good movie, but we'll have to talk about that some other time.
Oh, Shaquille O'Neal. Talking about people who weren't meant to be actors becoming actors. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, so let's get back to talking about Conan the Barbarian. So it is the month of June, and here on Moving Panels in the month of June, we like to talk about movies that have hit some sort of milestone, anniversary, if you will. And it has been 40 years since the release of Arnold Schwarzenegger's pivotal starting movie, because this was like the first movie he starred in.
Absolutely.
Conan the Barbarian. And so when do you remember, I'm stealing this from Tim from the 80s Flick Flashback, when do you remember seeing Conan for the first time?
So upon rewatch, I realized that I saw it probably way too early in my life because this is not a child-friendly movie.
It is not.
I don't know. I honestly think I was like 6 or 7. I grew up watching this, with my dad, of course. But
now, were you watching it on television? Maybe edited?
Probably. Yeah. I did not see it in the theater. I would have been like a year old. So, but yeah, it was more than likely the edited for TV version. So there wasn't the nudity and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, very young.
Same for me. Although when I went back and watched it, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, but when I went back and watched it, I think I was sitting there going, I apparently remember Conan the Destroyer a lot more than I remember Conan the Barbarian.
I know what you mean. I remember this movie like in snippets. Like I remember, spoilers if you haven't seen it. Valeria
40-year-old movie.
Valeria getting shot and then
by the snake arrow.
Yeah, I do remember those things and the weird special effects of holy moly! Why am I Darth Vader's voice?
James Earl
Jones. Wow, I was like, I can't remember the arguably most famous actor. Where he becomes the snake, like the very strange special effects there. But yeah, it's very much in snippets. When I rewatched it, same as you, I probably hadn't seen it in 25 years. Ballpark.
Yeah,
it'd been a long time.
Good while for me.
So, watching it, I was like, oh, this, okay, it has a very different continuity than I remember seeing. But yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a bunch of pieces of a story kind of all put together. Sure. It's like there's a overall story intertwined, but there's some chunks. But we'll get into that later. So the movie was released May 14th, so we're about a month off of its 40th anniversary, May 14th of 1982, and it was directed by Walter Sobach. John Milius. Did you get the joke there?
Yes.
I don't know how many people will. If not, look that up. But directed by John Milius, and there's so much behind the production of this film that I don't know how much we want to get into. What do you know behind the production of the film? And this is before we'll get into the background of the character and all. Just the film itself.
It's fascinating, actually. The movie was basically made because a producer thought Arnold Schwarzenegger needs to be in a movie.
Yeah.
And a friend of his...
They saw Pumping Iron and went, we need a movie for him.
Yeah. And then a friend of his was like, Conan would be perfect. And the guy was not familiar with either the original novels or the comic books. So his friend brought over comic books. And of course he saw the art and was like, oh yeah, Arnold would be amazing in this, but thought that was shooting too high, that they wouldn't be able to get the rights to it. So he goes to Lynn, I can't remember the guy's name, the guy who owned the rights for Conan at the time, who was actually a contemporary of his original creator, and it, through a long chain of events, like he tried to buy that dude's work, which was kind of a lesser work, Thongor, and wound up kind of backdoor dealing and getting Conan, and then of course they sell it off to Dino De Laurentiis, and who did not at all think this would be a good movie, but apparently once he bought in, like he was 100% in, and they went pretty hard. Oliver Stone wrote the original script, which he still gets credited as a writer. So you wonder how much of his script made it through.
Again, it had to be enough to retain the writing rights, credit. But Oliver Stone's, wasn't it supposed to be set in like an post-apocalyptic future?
He had like a ton of mutants and stuff. Like there's a long interview you can find on YouTube about this, where Oliver Stone,
it was going to be like 4 hours long.
He's like super passionate about it. You could tell that Oliver Stone, at least at the time of the interview, still really wanted to make this movie. And so apparently he was writing like 12 movies. He wanted it to be like James Bond.
Like a James Bond.
Where like every other year a new Conan movie came out. And but yeah, was like super into mutants and what a post nuclear war world might look like. And so very different movie in that sense, and very different from the source material. But Oliver Stone's never been one to go by convention, so whatever.
Yeah, and wasn't there even talk of him directing it at one point?
So Oliver Stone apparently had not directed anything. He had just written Platoon at this point in his career. So he was a little bit of an unknown, and I think Dino decided that if he was going to throw that kind of money to make the movie they wanted to make, that he needed somebody who was a little more established. Ridley Scott was attached to the program or to the movie for a little while.
I do remember reading that,
and obviously eventually turned it down, didn't want to do it. And then, in my opinion, a guy who never left the '60s wound up getting the movie, and because it very contextually and feel wise, as I rewatched it, I was like, man, if you told me this movie was released in 1968. I probably wouldn't have argued with you, but
yeah. Well, I mean, John Milius was. You had mentioned Oliver Stone. John Milius, who ended up directing, was the writer of Apocalypse Now.
Right. Yeah.
So he had that connection.
It's kind of wild how we all remember this as being kind of a cheesy B movie, just to give Arnold a stage. And you look at like the heavy hitters of cinematic drama they're involved in this, and you're like, oh wow, like it's pretty wild. But yeah. I think that jibes really well with the source material, though, to be 100% honest with you, because that story is also insane, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah. And then you were mentioning 60s, and I was sitting here Googling something because I was pretty sure of a connection, but I'm not finding it. But I thought this movie actually had a connection with Barbarella, which we've done an episode before.
Right.
Oh, it was Dino De Laurentiis.
Right.
He produced both movies.
Yeah,
so yeah. So there you go. So let's get into the characters. There's not a lot of depth to these characters.
Right.
So don't know how much we'll talk about. We'll obviously talk about Conan first, which was, again, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his first big role in theaters. What was funny was before this movie was released, this is one of the rare comic connections I can make. Before this movie was released, in February of 1978, Marvel, who had the Conan comic, released a What If, and it was What If number 13, and the title was What If Conan the Barbarian Walked the Earth Today? And it has Conan getting sent into modern day, 1978, And when he shows up, all these people are startled by him, and they have this one bubble in which a girl looks at another guy and says, "Doesn't he look a lot like Arnold Schwarzenegger?"
Nice. I actually didn't know that one. That's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was because the writer behind the story kind of knew it was already being put into motion.
Yeah.
That Arnold would be playing. Of course, the guy replies back. He goes, "No, I think he looks more like Sly Stallone," which I also found funny.
Yeah.
But the thing I really have to give Arnold credit for is Arnold trained for this role.
Right. Yeah.
He made it believable.
So, one of the things you can find in all of the random, it seems like this was also one of the first movies that had interviews as if they were going to put it on a DVD. I don't know, because you can find a ton of interviews of the people involved. And they kind of had a mini boot camp, which is common today. Like, we hear a lot of movies that do that now. You know, Saving Private Ryan, of course, is famous for it, stuff like that. But they kind of boot camped the main actors because they needed them to look good, you know, riding horses. And, you know, obviously it's not like Arnold had a background in swordsmanship, you know, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to change his entire weightlifting regimen because he needed the flexibility to look good doing these things, not just, you know, look incredibly muscular as one does to be Mr. Olympia. So, apparently Arnold put in a lot of work and took it very seriously, and you know, and acting classes that went on. The other one that's really funny, just as a side note to that, is his sidekick Buddy is actually just a friend of the director, and was a professional surfer who had zero acting background. But I'm jumping characters right now, but. Yeah,
I mean, there's not much more to
go.
What more
Conan,
is there to say about that guy?
I mean,
is it? Sobotai.
Yeah, I think that addressing Conan though, and specifically Arnold as Conan, I still would argue that when you picture Arnold Schwarzenegger I can't speak all of a sudden, at the height of his prowess, the images you're picturing, many of them are from Conan the Barbarian. I mean the scene toward the end when they're in the temple and he flexes out his entire back and broadens his shoulders and throws his arms out and then like circularly wheels his arms to the front. You know, I think that is iconic. I like I was saying a minute ago, I think that's the thing you still see when you think about Arnold when he was, you know, at the height of his powers. So.
Well, and a lot of shots of him with the sword, different poses, like the sword over his head or him just holding the sword with both hands to the side. Right. You know, all of those are connected with Conan and images you still see. Because I really think Conan and Terminator are the two characters that will always be, you know, Arnold characters.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, although we haven't seen other people play Terminator. They haven't played his Terminator.
Right.
But even when Jason Momoa took on Conan in 2011, whatever year that was, 2011, I mean, you still are going, nah, it's Arnold.
Yep.
Like, you can't, I mean, it's just, he's same way Christopher Reeve for you and I is always Superman. Oh, yeah. And so you're always comparing the next guy to play Superman to Christopher Reeve. If anyone ever plays Conan, they're going to be associated to Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And I mean, obviously Jason Momoa wasn't what he is today when he played that in 2011. But,
true.
I mean, that's kind of a big deal that you blow off Jason Momoa as Conan because Arnold owns this particular character in that sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about the character really quick. Mm-hmm. It's called Conan the Barbarian, which was first used in one of the books put together back in like the 30s or 40s. And then, of course, it was the name of the comic in 1970 released by Marvel. Mm-hmm. But this version of Conan in the movie, is he really a barbarian?
Well, no. This is where the source material and the movie really diverge. if you're not familiar with the original novels, they're pretty fascinating, and just the story that goes into it. The creator of Conan the Barbarian is a guy named Robert E. Howard, and he's a novelist who really does not get the credit he probably deserves as the first published author in the subgenre of fantasy called sword and sorcery. And so, before Lord of the Rings, before C.S. Lewis, brings out The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, any of that stuff comes to market, Conan the Barbarian predates all that. And Robert E. Howard, as opposed to the two authors in particular I just named, is a crazy person. And I say that trying to be funny, but at the same time, like, he probably was legitimately mentally ill in some way, shape, or form. He tells a story, and no one's really sure whether it's just myth, something he made up to as a storyteller, or if he really believes this. But he tells the story that he started writing the Conan books because it was a dark, stormy night in Texas where he lived, and all of a sudden he felt a brooding presence over his shoulder, turns around and looks, and Conan the Barbarian, hefting a double-handed battle axe, is standing over him and tells him to write his story. So that's kind of how the whole thing kicks off. And unfortunately, Robert took his own life only about 4 years after he got famous for writing Conan. And so, but
at the age of 30.
Yeah. So obviously, a guy who's struggling with some stuff, but created a lasting character. It then gets really muddy after that because property rights were not intellectual property rights were not really a big thing back then. So it got passed around between several writers. And so if you're, in the modern sense, somebody who likes to have a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a canon for the stories that you're in, Conan is probably not your book you want to pick up because it goes all over the place. But I do agree with you that the movie really was meant to encapsulate kind of one portion, because one of the things that Robert did that I think is really interesting is he wrote how he felt Conan's world would have told his story, in the sense of, like, he didn't use modern storytelling in a chronology or first he was born, then he does this, then he does this. It wasn't that. He told very broken stories, and he would jump from one thing to the other. In one scene, you have Conan the Conqueror as king, as an old man, which of course we get at the end of this movie. You have him,
which was intended to be a future film. Yeah, and they never got to it.
You have Conan the Thief, which is also addressed in the movie. So there's a couple of the novels where he hasn't made it to prominence as a warrior yet, and he's just scraping by stealing stuff, and just anyways, it's just very interesting the way the character came to be. So if you have any interest in this movie at all, it's kind of fun to go back and look at the novels that spawned the whole thing, and then of course get picked up by Marvel in the 70s, and really made famous for us today.
And that's where a lot of the research behind this kind of became kind of hard.
Oh yeah.
Because like you said, it's been tossed about all which way. Although I do feel more of this was from the comic than it was the books, but
well, let's be honest. A lot of the movie is from comic books, not necessarily Conan the Barbarian comic books.
True, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah. Like I said, we'll get into that later. So let's go ahead and move on to kind of what we're already hinting at. Let's talk about another character.
Yeah.
Thulsa Doom, played by the biggest let me say it, maybe one of the two biggest actors in this movie, James Earl Jones, who obviously was also famous for being another great villain in Darth Vader, or at least the voice of. But it's funny because Robert E. Howard, who also created the character of Thulsa Doom, he didn't create him for Conan.
Right.
He created him for King Cole of Atlantis, Cole the Conqueror, which is another movie, Kevin Sorbo led movie, which I found out was taking a Conan script and they reworked it and made it a Kull script.
I did not read that. That's funny.
Yeah, because originally,
talk about full circle.
Originally when the Conan movies were made, like I said, Oliver Stone had the 12-part series in mind. Universal, I think, had a 4-part series in mind. Mm. That would be Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Conqueror, or Conan the Destroyer, Conan the Conqueror, and a King Conan movie. And the Conan the Conqueror turned into Kull the Conqueror. And they made it into, but Thulsa Doom was a villain for Kull. What's interesting is he's not associated with the snake thing as far as I could tell. But he, and I'm just going to put it out there, he was Skeletor, though.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. He was a wizard with a skull for a head.
Yep. And there's not much comic connection, honestly. Like, it's pretty much the name and the fact that he's some sort of mage, sorcerer, warrior that wants to take over the world. That's about where it ends. The whole aesthetic, all of that was changed a lot by Milius when he took over, and he really made it what we came to see. And so they basically just took a name and ran with it.
Yeah, and there were original concept ideas to give him the skull head, and going ahead and jumping into something I had later in my notes. Of course, to capitalize on kind of the success of Star Wars, they said, hey, we need to put out a toy line. And Mattel actually got the rights for the toy line. But Mattel, after they saw I don't know if they read the final script or they saw a first cut of the movie, they said, yeah, no, we can't do this, because it still had an R rating. Mm-hmm. Which, Star Wars didn't. Star Wars was PG. Star Wars was meant for kids. Right. And they're going, yeah, I don't really think the, Conan being crucified playset is really going to be a big sell for us. Nice. So they decided not to make the toys.
Kids weren't going to play with the Wheel of Pain,
Yeah. Although rumor is that Mattel, who had already started conceptualizing the toys, is what turned into the He-Man action figures.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that one before. It makes perfect sense. I mean,
it makes sense. He-Man looks just like color. Conan, yeah, with blonde hair. And Thulsa Doom, like I said, the original character is a wizard with a skull for a head, and that's exactly what Skeletor is.
And I mean, She-Ra is more or less, a Valkyrie in the same sense.
Oh yeah, the Valeria.
So, yeah, there's a lot of good ones there. That's interesting.
Yeah, which that's another one. Just jumping into her real quick. Valeria is not a Conan character, I don't think either. Yeah. Nope. She was put in because they wanted a Valkyrie character.
Right. Yeah, John Milius was huge on the idea of a Valkyrie. The story, myth or not, who knows, goes that he saw, I'm going to butcher her name, Sandal Bergman.
Bergman, yeah.
She's a dancer professionally, not an actor.
Yes.
And was just like, she is perfect. And really the character's an amalgam of a lot of female conquests that Conan has through the books and stuff. Not if it's kind of easy to bash old stories, of course, and remembering that the originals were written in the 1930s. I think Conan was actually fairly progressive on a lot of things. Robert deals really well with stuff like race and things of that nature. But he's still a bit of a chauvinist. His female characters are not terribly well fleshed out. So, it is what it is, I guess. But
yeah, it was All That Jazz in 1979 was the movie he saw her in.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah.
And she has no film credits after this, which I'm going to be honest.
Oh, no. She does. She does. She actually has She has a few. She continued in this kind of, I guess, franchise, if you will. She played Queen Gendrin in Red Sonja.
Yeah, like I said, she has virtually no. I'm just.
And she was the main character in She.
I'm meaning that this really probably should have been her breakout role because I don't know. Maybe I'm biased because this is one of those like movies from a kid that has a lot of nostalgia for me, but she acts really well. Like considering the tiny bit of dialogue she has, you actually kind of care about the character by the time that she's killed. You know, I thought she did an incredible job in a arguably hard role. Kind of the same as you were talking about Barbarella earlier. I think Jane Fonda does an incredible job of making a pretty poorly written character alive in that one. So credit due where it's due. You know, I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, and going back to something we've talked about before, it later gave her a role in the television show Swamp Thing.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's go on to, let's go back. Anything more you want to talk about with James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom with his luxurious long hair?
And blue eyes from time to time.
Yes, big old blue eyes.
Yeah, so they were, again, trying to kind of use the source material. They were trying to not make it a race of people we knew. Was kind of the idea there, that you were supposed to think that Thulsa Doom is like the last of his race, like some mystical better than us race, but they're dying out and their power is waning, and he's kind of the last one that we know of. And so I think idea-wise that was cool. Execution-wise, I don't think it holds up incredibly well. It's the cut scenes to change his eye color, it just gets a little bizarre in my opinion. And that specifically is kind of what I was meaning about it looks very 60s, because I don't think this even kind of pans up to 1982 visual effects, to be honest, as far as those scenes go.
I mean, we had Star Wars at that point, and I mean, we'd had E.T.
Yeah. So,
and E.T.'s got pretty good effects, comparatively. So,
a little bit.
No, I agree. I agree with you on that. Let's go on to the other big name actor who has like the smallest role in this entire movie. King Osirk, or however you pronounce his name.
Max von Sydow.
Played Max von Sydow. So, I don't know if you were aware of this. King Osric was actually real.
Uh-huh.
He was a real Anglo-Saxon king in the 17th century. And that is all I know. So yeah,
he does. I mean, obviously, he does a great job.
For his 5 minutes on screen.
Yeah, so they filmed more with him. Did you know that?
Yeah, a death scene.
So he was supposed to get murdered by his own guards, who had also been turned by the daughter to the snake cult and all this kind of stuff. But they wound up cutting it because they couldn't get the blood system for when he gets stabbed. They couldn't get it to work. Mm-hmm. And by the time it actually does work, it was comical to everyone on set. And they all lose it, including Max. And you can find this footage. It's really kind of funny.
Yeah.
And everybody is rolling around laughing in this like horrible scene of blood and gore. And it was totally unusable for the movie, so they cut it. I also think it doesn't add anything, and it was already a long movie. We haven't addressed that yet. I mean, this is a 2-hour plus runtime movie.
And feels it.
Yes,
I'm not going to lie. It does.
Yes, it does. But
it's a
lot of brooding.
That's about it.
A lot of brooding in this movie. Just
well, I think it slows it down because, and we'll probably get into more of this in a minute, there's so little dialogue.
Yeah.
Like the music's great in it. I'm not going to deny the music, but there's so little dialogue. All right. Any other characters you want to talk about? I think do we want to talk about the problematic nature that Sabatai was played by Gary Lopez.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that one is as problematic as the narrator and his like
Mako.
Yeah, his very Asian stereotype, pronunciation of things, and being the goofy character. When you finally see him on screen, he's more comic relief and kind of that one's almost a throwback to the time period where the original novels were written, making fun of Asian people as if they're just this goofy culture, but it doesn't hold up well.
At least Mako is Japanese.
Yes.
Versus Jerry Lopez, who, although is Hawaiian, clearly his last name's Lopez.
Right.
So,
but to be fair, and maybe I'm just being too much of a nerd here and not giving... I mean, obviously they were going for a Mongol-ish look.
Yeah.
But these are not real-world countries. He is not playing a Mongol. He is not, in Genghis Khan's army being played by a gentleman named Lopez. So I don't have as hard of a time kind of reconciling that, I guess.
See, and I guess I'm the same way about Mako. Like, I don't think that big of a deal with Mako. I mean, Mako, he goes on to play Uncle in Avatar.
Right.
He voices Splinter.
Yeah.
In TMNT.
He does a lot of work.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's still working.
It's just the silly nature of his character that kind of gets me, along with the, that used to be the stereotype. The whole thing about when he stabs the guy who is trying to kill Jerry's character, he stabs him and falls over and is then just like on the ground like a turtle
on him. Yeah, turtle on his back.
You're like, all right, man, like, come on.
Well, you got to have the comic relief, and if we want to go back to the He-Man connection, I mean, he was Orko.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, it's clearly who he was. He was Orko. Awesome. So, all right. So let me ask my question. So, out of all the characters you saw in the movie, who would you want to see more of, and who do you wish would have their head rolled down a flight of stairs?
Man. It would have been nice to see Thulsa Doom's character actually given some kind of reason for doing what he's doing. We've talked about this a lot, with Thanos and stuff like that, that it's always more compelling when you have a believable villain and understand his motives. So I wish there had been something there, because you get absolutely nothing on this dude. He just apparently is a sorcerer,
evil.
Who,
he's just evil.
Yeah, for real. Who likes orgies? So
I mean, yeah. His last name's Doom. Of course, he's evil.
But I'd like to see him fleshed out a little bit more. There's so few characters to send a head down flight of stairs. So, maybe unpopular, but Jerry Lopez's character, and I'm spacing on the name of the character all of a sudden. Sabatai, yeah. It just doesn't drive the plot well for me. The only scene he's got that has any emotional payoff at all is when he's crying when Valeria's dead. And he says that I'm crying for the Crimean who will never cry, and you're like, that's kind of cool.
It's a great, it's a great moment. Yeah, no, I really did like. That's another scene, getting too much into the movie now instead of characters. That's another scene where when Mako's character says, the fire won't light out there.
Yeah.
And then the fire lights and he's looking all shocked and all that. And I'm going, are you not going to explain this, or
why the fire shouldn't have lit?
Yeah, why the fire shouldn't have been versus why it is lagging. Yeah. So...
Did Conan also discover gunpowder? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah. What was on Valeria that it just exploded?
Oh
man.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop Culture Roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels as much as we can. So we've already talked about this being created by Robert E. Howard as a novel, short stories, first appearing in Weird Tales magazine back in 1932. The story was titled "The Phoenix on the Sword." He only wrote 21 stories.
Well,
17 of which were published before his death.
Right, and 4 unfinished stories. Yeah. But anyways,
yes.
That's neither here nor there.
Yeah. And then I think the guy who took it over, which I didn't write his name down, I know you kind of mentioned, I think he was his agent.
Right.
Is that? Yeah, he was his agent.
Editor,
he took over. He ended up taking all the stories and putting them together to put them into like pulp comic status and the pulp novels. And they were turned into books. This wasn't until like the 60s that they were turned into books. So Howard died in 36. So you're looking at it took another 20-something years before, almost 30 years, before Conan really became a thing people really knew about. And then as a comic book, it actually was in the 50s. Did you know about this?
No.
So, yes, there was a Mexican comic in 1952 that was released titled and apologize for my Spanish here, La Reina de la Costa Negra, which was based on Howard's story Queen of the Black Coast. However, Howard's estate did not get approval to this comic. It was released, though, so there is a 1952 Conan comic book. Yeah, out there. However, Marvel, as you talked about, acquired the rights and released the first comic in October of 1970. It was written by Roy Thomas with artwork from Barry Windsor Smith. However, and I know you wanted to talk about this, even though Barry Windsor Smith drew the comic, he was greatly inspired by the comic drawn for the books back in the 60s.
Right. So Frank Frazetta is arguably the guy who comes up with what we now know as sword and sorcery fiction artwork. So he drew these incredible covers, and if you go back and look, I can for sure understand why Marvel put this on their radar after Frank's artwork, because he was light years ahead of his time as far as comic cover art would have gone. I mean, they look closer to physique-wise. Now, it has a very different texture and feel, but it looks a lot like what you don't see until like the 1990s in superhero stuff. So, incredible artist, and it's really cool. If you go into any bookstore today and you go down the fantasy aisle, the enormous muscular warrior and scantily clad female companion, that is Frank's legacy, if you will. You know, he really kind of created that genre of artwork to be attached to this subgenre of books in particular. But it definitely, in my opinion, sets the stage for Marvel's work. And Barry was very upfront, actually, with he very much just took directly from Frank's work to create his own work. Do you know the story of how Barry came to be the guy on this?
I probably read through it, but I do not have it in my notes.
So if you look at the run, he's only the penciler for the first 24 episodes of Conan the Barbarian. And it's because the Marvel at that time was owned, I'm going to lose this one. I can't remember the owner's name, but you know, it's kind of an old, like, Jameson-ish owner of Marvel. You know, you kind of picture the old cigar chomping editor, and that was the dude who owned and is in charge of Marvel at the time. And he was not really on board with spending money on this, didn't think it was going to be a big comic book. It was never Conan was not introduced backdoor the way most comic book comic heroes and stuff like that were at the time, where you introduce it in someone else's run, kind of see if the people like him. The Conan is different enough. It had to be an all or nothing thing. And so he didn't want to spend the money on it. And the guy who really was pushing it at first, spoilers later, becomes the artist for the bulk of the run, is John Buscema. But John was already a known artist. And so Marvel was not going to spend the money to put John in the seat for this. So Roy had a friend, Barry Smith, a British artist, who wound up taking over, and it really launches his career. Barry Smith goes on to do probably his most famous is he partners with Chris in X-Men, Chris Claremont. There we go. I always say it wrong. But him and Chris Claremont do the X-Men run where Storm loses her powers. He also draws or is the penciler for the Weapon X series of Wolverine. Like, he's done some stuff that if you're into comics at all, you know this art. Yeah. So and Conan is for sure what kicked off his career. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and you go to writer Roy Thomas. I mean, he's the guy that he was Stan Lee's successor as the editor-in-chief of Marvel.
Yep.
And I mean, he went on he co-created, I think, Vision and Morbius and Ghost Rider and, bunch of characters from I think a good connection here. Valkyrie. He co-created Valkyrie
that's really
for
funny.
Marvel. So,
and I think I just kind of want to mention that to say, like, don't sell this short. Like, I realize that the casual listener probably is going, "Oh, I didn't realize that Conan was based on a comic book." That, to be fair, is based on a series of novels. Yeah. But Conan is an incredibly successful comic book. It runs through the 90s nonstop.
So Marvel released Conan comics all the way. I think they were every 2 months is how they released them until 1996.
Yep.
And then Marvel it didn't stop there though, because Marvel relinquished the ownership of the character. Dark Horse Comics picked it up in the early 2000s. Yep. Dark Horse made, I think, even a video game using Conan. The Jason Momoa movie was actually during Dark Horse's run. And then Marvel just recently in 2019 re-required Conan. And Conan he's actually become one of the Savage Avengers.
Yeah.
And so he, along with I think like Punisher and Ghost Rider, I think, is also on that team. It's a bunch of the like anti-heroes. But yeah, Conan he's just kind of been a part of comics for
50 years.
50 years, yeah. With a little gap in there. But yeah, almost 50 years, and yet, like you said, this is one of those movies that, if you really think about it, this was a Marvel movie before Howard the Duck officially became the first Marvel movie.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's wild.
So.
But back to the movie itself. Obviously, not a ton of direct comic connections.
No.
So it's really hard to pin any of that stuff specifically down. Even the fact that one of the criticisms of the movie from the novel fans in particular is Conan was never intended to have an origin story. And anybody who wants to hear my thoughts on that, you can go listen to the Joker episode. Sometimes I just don't want to know an origin. It's so it's and this one I would probably agree with, and I would also say that the first act of this movie is not fantastic. You get the origin story, although I will say, what a way to kick off a movie! Just the butchering of a village. You kind of know what you're in for right off the bat. But you get Conan's origin story, then you see his time as a gladiator, and that's so overplayed in 1982 in particular. Like you've had this done arguably a lot better several times, and it's kind of unneeded in my opinion. Like I mean, maybe that's just how in a relatively short period of time you explain that this dude is very skilled at combat that way. So maybe it advances the story that way. But I just think the first act in particular could have been done a lot better and stayed a little truer to the source material. But I'm trying to give Milius a little bit of credit in that in 1982, that wasn't a thing. Nobody cared about source material and staying true. Yeah. So...
Well, yeah, because in the first comic in 1970, he's just there.
Right.
Like there's a battle going on, and Conan is like a sword for hire, if you will. It's just he's again more of a barbarian. He just goes around and he fights whoever will pay him more. Is really what it comes down to. I think that's even a line in the first comic was they said, well, why didn't you work for these other people? Well, so because they paid more.
Yeah.
So yeah. And that's again where I go into, was he really a barbarian? I mean, this Conan in this movie, he has an origin story where he was raised in a very civil, village.
Well, I mean, his dad does tell him though, that the only thing trustworthy in life is steel, but
Yes. Yes, even though I'm not an expert on this, but the way that he forges the sword at the beginning during the opening credits is a way to ensure that sword is going to break.
Yeah, you don't melt the steel ever. Yeah. It looks cool on film though. Let's be honest.
it's a good cinematic opening. But yeah, for him to say that nothing's stronger than steel, but
maybe if you
sword's
going to
break,
which
and it does later.
It does. So.
Although it lasts a good 20-something years.
This is true.
However old Conan is supposed to be. But then also Conan, like you said, Conan is trained. He's trained on how to fight. He's trained with the swords, and the comic book Conan is just a. I'm going to attack. I'm going to start swinging, and
he's survived enough battles to get good at it. Yeah,
yeah. He's more of he's war trained,
right?
If anything, so yeah, that kind of goes into it. But unless you've got more to say, I think we've just about exhausted anything that there is.
Yeah, I kind of wrapped up all my points. I guess it's a very interesting history of a movie being made. I think we kind of undersell it in that sense.
Yeah.
It's
but there are several documentaries out there about it.
Yeah.
Several you can find. And that's another great thing about this. This is one of those movies that even when they went back to do like a making of featurette for like a DVD, 25, 30 years later, like pretty much the entire cast came back to do interviews.
Yeah.
Like this isn't a movie that I think everyone associated with this movie is proud of the work they did.
Yeah.
Like they don't look upon it negatively.
Even Oliver Stone. It's even really kind of crazy. You don't see that very often.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into our final decision, bag it, stack it, or trade it. So go ahead, Chad. Which one do you give it and why?
So if I'm honest, the movie as it stands alone is a stack it. Like I would, it's something I definitely would want to, show friends. Like this is an interesting piece of art, all that sort of stuff. I don't think that it's a masterpiece as a standalone article. Had Conan the Destroyer done better, which that's a whole other conversation, and they were able to create a cinematic universe of Conan, I think it could maybe be a different story, but it's kind of a stack it for me, as it's a good watch. I probably won't wait 25 years again to see it, kind of thing, but it's not worth trading. I don't dislike it, but it's not a mint thing that I'm concerned about curating either.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I really kind of wanted to say bag it for it, just because of the significance it has.
I 100% agree.
But I had to go stack it, and part of the reason, like you said, is because it's been, like you said, I don't know if it's been 20 years for me, but it's been a good long while since I've even thought about this movie. It's a good movie. It's not a great movie. It's a good movie. It does drag at points. There are points of the movie that just seem completely random. The encounter he has with the witch lady.
Yeah. Where he gets the prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little crazy.
That seems really random and crazy. I said witch lady. Is she a witch? Is she a vampire? What is she? But the sets are amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna it's amazing, the sets. And then the fact that they filmed the one actually being burned down.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you would think when they create sets like this, like you'd want to just keep them up just for tourist attractions or something. But no, they destroyed them. Sets are amazing. The music is good. I really do think this is one of Arnold's best performances, like overall.
Yeah.
I mean, Terminator was kind of different. He only has, I think, like 8 lines of dialogue in Terminator, and his character was meant to be a little bit more stoic. But I think this movie showed that he could act, you know, something, and for a first go at acting, I think he pulls off a pretty good job.
Yeah.
I don't think he's great at the end when he sits down on the steps and is kind of contemplating.
Yeah, I know exactly what
everything.
You're talking about.
But I think it's a good performance. No, it's not 100% true to the character, but I like that they set up at the very beginning, as much as I don't like quotes at the beginning of movies, to give the quote, "That which does not kill us make us stronger."
Yeah. That
was like, here, we're going to go ahead and tell you this is the theme of the movie.
Yeah.
And they held to that throughout the entire thing. And even when it does kill you, you get brought back and you're stronger.
Nice.
That's what we saw.
Well played.
Yeah. But yeah, I think overall it's a good one. Something that just popped in my head. And so we can go back a little bit and talk about this. So Thulsa Doom decapitates Conan's mom in one blow.
Right.
Just a smooth backhand of the sword. Conan takes 3 chops?
Oh yeah, he has
to take off Thulsa Doom's head. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's pretty. To be fair, he is using a broken sword to do it. He's using the broken sword his father made. So, which ironically is also the one that cut his mom's head off. So, yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with all those points. I mean, it kicked off the largest action star ever
of the 80s. Yeah.
Pretty
much the man who, pretty much the
prototype of the action
yeah, that's
star.
what I was trying to look for. Yeah. The bar that the action star would be set. Cause I think even Sylvester Stallone, even when he had done, he had done First Blood and had been set as an action star. As he went along, he bulked up.
Oh yeah, for sure. By Rambo 3, he's a different looking dude.
Yeah, Rambo 3. Even in the Rocky movies, he got bigger with almost with each Rocky movie. So that because that was the template. Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the template.
Yeah, and I think he, as much as I was talking about Frank Frazetta's art, I think you kind of superimpose Arnold onto that, and Arnold became the template for a lot of comic book art. I think that a lot of I think it's very hard to overestimate the impact this movie had on pop culture.
Because even in comics, you talked about the way characters looked in the 90s, especially with artists like Todd McFarlane, but even Frank Miller. And a lot of the artwork he would do in the 80s with Batman.
Yep.
I mean, he gave Batman a lot of bulk and
for sure.
So yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. So very, very impactful movie. So we probably should bag it, but I think the movie as a standalone is a stack it. So
yeah. It the impact it has, you would bag that, but as a movie, it's a stack it. So, all right. Well, thank you, Chad. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in again to this kind of 40th anniversary celebration of Conan the Barbarian. We'll have to hit Conan the Destroyer and Cole the Conqueror and Red Sonja and all the other stuff that came from this exact same background.
Yeah.
We'll have to hit all those later. But thanks, Chad. Thanks for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Like and subscribe everywhere you can. We're on all your social media platforms, at Moving Panels, and wherever you find podcasts. Share us and let your friends know. But for today, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.